Well, look, Kevin, man, good to have you. We're
Yeah,
excited to have the conversation today, and I'd love to talk all the data conversation, the regulatory environment, all of everything that I know you're the expert on. But I'll let you kick us off with a little background and intros, man, and talk a little bit about what you guys are up to.
sure thing. No, and I appreciate the opportunity, guys. As I said, been always watching the videos and the LinkedIn's, and it adds some light to our industry, which is much due and much appreciated. So Kevin McWey, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at DataVisor. This is my 20th year in financial crime. I started as an SDR. Someone dumped a compliance solution on my lap because I think at Metavante, a core banking solution back in the day, no one else wanted it. And I never turned back. And I've gone through the progressions of technology, setting up the systems, kind of half sales, half R&D, product, channel. I've been around it all. And at the end of the day, very motivated to start getting ahead of this, making some ground. I think the one thing we always have to realize too is a lot of the financial stuff starts with some of the most devious human crimes in the world. So I think that we as an industry have an opportunity with new technology to really address these problems and be a lot more effective at preventing them than just finding them.
Really well said. I was actually on a cybersecurity webinar this morning, and a couple hundred bankers, and talking through, we started with the broad strokes, and then we kind of got to where we've been, where we're at, and where we're going, and a little bit of the AI conversation. And one of the things that I think we did a decent job of pointing out was, you've got this compounding effect with AI, right? Whether that's around sophistication or breadth and depth, as well as speed, all of these problems. But also, if you think about it sort of the other way, we can use AI to slow them down and use that as our defense as well. And I know you guys are kind of on the cutting edge of that world, right? Transaction monitoring, playing through all those things. You want to talk some about that? I just love that topic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is really what excites me. I mean, as I said, through the past 20 years, I mean, we've had to go through so many different manual processes, paper, overnight reports, just relying on the best humans to have the best eyeballs, and the best experience. And, there's also lack of training, lack of awareness, things like that. Um, AI and machine learning is being used against us, at a speed we can't comprehend. I think, saying we're getting lapped from the bad guys is an understatement. It's, I picture in my head that scene from the first Superman movie where he's going around the world so damn fast it goes back in time. That the fraudsters are kind of coming back to our world a little bit because they are so advanced. Because, I think one of the biggest challenges is there's an understanding gap. A lot of us coming from the practical application space understand what we can see and understand. And machine learning, artificial intelligence, generative AI, these are big words. They're thrown around a ton, and there is a lot of complexity and there's a lot of context behind them. And also, at the same point, we wield the power to put a lot of these attacks, stop them in their tracks. But the issue you have to do first is you have to educate, you have to evangelize, and you have to bring that down to an understanding of what it means for their business, specific use cases, what it means for their customers. That's kind of where I come in. I'm not a technologist by trade. I don't have really any mathematical or data science skill sets to speak of. But what I was able to do is kind of learn on the ground with the advent of these new technologies, even going from rules to analytics. And then you introduce things like graph, and then I think something called RPA was there for a little bit. And then I'm kind of wondering where that all fits in the scheme now. But the reality is the slow adoption is kind of twofold. It's understanding and it's regulation. We get very nervous about, oh, if we accidentally decline the wrong people in the wrong population, you can be under a lot of scrutiny. Privacy is sacred here in the United States, and no one is trying to throw that aside. It's been abused before. The one thing we have to come to the grips with, though, is our information is out there and has been out there for a lot longer than we want to admit. Um, I don't think I have thought for 15 years that I'm the only one who possesses my social security number. So they are using data and machine learning to profile us to such a degree of accuracy that the traditional methods are failing. We have to understand and respond with the same speed. Kevin needs to be profiled by the good guys too. I want them to know so much about me and know that I'm okay with a little bit of intrusion. So also allowing the population to understand what you're doing is for their greater benefit. I think up and down the line, there needs to be a translation evolution from what this amazing technology does and the speed of what it does it. But you have to get that down to what does it mean for the customers? What does it mean for the operators? And at the end of the day, the world we're in, guys, people have to make money to stay in business. AI presents an amazing opportunity where we have tough times hiring. So a lot of people are saying, is AI taking jobs? Okay, you go hire and find the amount of people it's going to take to look at tens of thousands of transactions per second with all these different variables and eyeball if it's fraud. It's just not possible. So considering machine learning, I really believe in the term augmented intelligence, supplementing our workforce, making them more effective, making sure they're not looking at the noise and they're truly looking at the bad actors and the sources of these crimes.
It's huge. I'll tell you what, man, there's part of this is like, let's just say dummy good, right? We didn't have, we copied the phone number, did this. I mean, some things that are just easy enough to pick up. We don't need a person for that one. It was an easy one, right?
Right.
And then you have the crazy stuff. Like me and Tanner went on a meeting the other day and they were talking about, let me back up and say this first. Sarah Beth had talked, she's an AML expert. She just talked a lot, Sarah Beth Felix, about think like a criminal, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, you laugh at that at first. I mean, it was a good one, especially when you had a couple of drinks. Like, think like a criminal. I love it.
Some of us are naturally good at it.
But yeah, then you really start thinking like a criminal. And
all of us are a touch.
And to your point, though, and they already got everything on everybody. It's when you begin to think like a criminal, now we can start getting ahead of the game.
Right.
They knew things like, hey, we don't do certain things till 90 days after account opening or blah, 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 or certain transactions. They figured out our rules a long time ago. And they're just 90-day one, 90+1 or whatever, right? Okay. And then we have this future coming that everybody is like, what could AI do? And I remember Elon Musk had a great line about, I hope once it's figured out the some knowledge of mankind that it finds us interesting, right? We can solve a lot of problems, get rid of the people, and we have the AI to kill them all. So this would be great. But what this conversation yesterday was about was like quantum computing and the ability to unencrypt everything we've ever done and all those types of things. And so to not have a handle on where it's at today, to have any better than what, let's say, as an industry we are, which I think we'd all agree is, we'll give it a C, right? We're not A level at any of this. And then guys like you come along and all of a sudden we're talking about, pretty close to B+, A- levels and a whole lot of neat things that we weren't able to do. You better get there pretty damn quick before all of these things. And by quantum is years away and it's like bullshit. It's not years and years and years away. That was in the 70s. We're there now. And it's coming quick. And the ability
it's so accelerated, even
kind of scary. Do you think so?
I think it's very scary. Because I think the same thing, even when you look at it from maybe a venture or startup perspective, you used to have these windows. If we can attack that gap, we have this, 5-year window. ChatGPT has been around for 2 years. We've come light years in 2 years beyond what I ever comprehended, even at IBM when we were talking about quantum and doing those type of things. And I'm like, this is one of the coolest things. And everything feels like I'm in like an 80s top secret lab, even though I was just doing the same thing I always do. But, like just being in that environment, and I could not interpret in 2018, having seen and been trained on all that type of technology that was coming about, where we are today. And that's 6-7 years.
Agreed.
The windows keep closing, but we also have to sit here and deal with, am I going to get fined? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do this? So there's got to be a public-private partnership, and it's not just people who need to get educated and adopt new solutions. It is the regulatory bodies, the examiners, and we have to, I think, as an industry, focus on, education, and then also, how do we actually get into the academic system and start training on that stuff? So our institutions, our fintechs, our payment engine companies can have access to a younger generation that can pick this up, because I think you guys know in our industry, I mean, I came from the larger core banking space. We're at a retirement precipice, and there's also, that also means it is time for AI, but these guys got to work hand in glove with everything. And then financial crime fighters are probably the most unique, driven, mission-oriented people who love learning everything. Like, so if you have the content, and this is why I always, always get pigeonholed, sales, revenue, whatever. But like, really, I get excited because it puts me in a position to kind of spread the message. And also a point on DataVisor, one of the reasons I joined here is, this type of technology that could defend this 5 years ago was very much reserved for the top of the market. And yes, there were defenses. And then we saw our credit unions getting annihilated the second they opened up, like, indirect lending channels, because they didn't have a digital detection presence that was very capable. They didn't know. They saw the opportunity, but with opportunity comes risk. But yeah, I mean, long story short, we have a long ways to go. We have to do it in a very short amount of time because those windows close more rapidly. And if you think about the exponential advancement in technology, you can't look at this in a linear way. This is building on top of itself very quickly.
Perfect.
No, absolutely. I think, some of the interesting things that we get to do and the interesting rooms we get to sit in and conversations, it's really wild to watch. I think kind of both sides of what you're saying. I would have thought forever the agencies, the regulatory bodies were far more advanced than they actually are. Not to say they don't cover a lot of ground and have a wide purview, but as far as understanding even the easy intricacies of the industry, they tend to live pretty far behind, right? And we all know that policy lives way further behind that, right? And so I think that's a challenge. But strikingly, on the other side of that spectrum, you walk into some of the government agencies and things like quantum are major topics, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are clearly they've been working these problems for the better part of a decade. Like you said, 2018, right? They're breaking ground on what are we going to do when this shows up. And I don't think that we're there in banking by any means, but our government, our agencies, a lot of the, the defense side, those folks are seriously ahead on these topics. I don't know if that's far enough ahead, but they're a lot further ahead than we are. And I don't know why. It just, like you said, man, it just scares the shit out of me. It jolts.
Another part of this, Tan, is the creation of regulation without a thorough understanding of the impacts of some of these things. I want to know more about tell me about DataVisor. If I don't know who you are, I want to learn more. I think I'm pretty good, but I know there's a lot more I can learn.
So DataVisor in this, because what I was getting at and why I joined. I mean, so Inglian and Fong came from Microsoft Research, and really their task was to solve the unsolvable. So back in the day, Microsoft had a ton of different scams and coordinated attacks going on through like Hotmail and things like that. And frankly, they came up with an idea, which wound up being really the birth child of their UML strategy and their patent, to look at kind of those innocuous things we think are innocuous, digital signals. Like, we know not innocuous, but like, okay, well, if I can't get everyone's PII, and I haven't labeled that type of behavior to that individual yet, how can I stop it? Well, there's a lot of signs and a lot of data and a lot of the metadata. And when you start seeing things like the same email address pattern or the same amounts being used or anything like that, instead of waiting to label those individual features and fraud types and then put it in the model, and maybe 6 months later, voila, you solve the problem, you're at the 13th iteration of that attack. So how DataVisor was born was by looking at these signals on a really large e-commerce global internet scale and solving that first. And these are the coordinated attacks. So the idea being, if you have an attack with like, let's say a ring of 10,000 people, you're not going to catch each one with a spear. How do you cast a net out there to get the majority of them? to stop just the traumatic bleeding, and minimize those attacks. And what it was able to do was look at patterns that immediately can be deemed as negative, that have no business being patterned like that, and then tagging all the lookalikes in real time to prevent that attack from pursuing. Those attacks that go on for days and days and days, they are milking millions of dollars. If you cut off just a day, 2 days, those massive fraud attacks can be solved. And then, about 4 or 5 years ago, started working with some money movement companies, financial institutions. And this was actually a belief I had with all the platforms I represent in the past. I said, the next generation, sorry to say it, isn't going to come from the banking industry. It's not fast enough. It doesn't conceptualize the future enough. And everyone's has built these around the understandings of batch ACH, SEPA, wire, deposit, check, you name it. Everything I ever sold was like kind of good at some things, and then we try to adopt it to others and kind of work. Well, maybe it just didn't. Now we come to a place where, because they didn't have a concept of the history of the financial system and not your payments and settlements and clearing, in their mind, they're like, money just moves digitally. Well, it will move digitally. So adapting not just the UML model, which you mentioned regulatory, like it's very hard to get, UML models sometimes through model governance, and you need explainability, even if they're effective. So they took the same concepts and built in a platform around rules, because people understand rules. And then how do you adapt machine learning to rules? Well, you look at the rule performance, and Gen AI can go in and say, hey, if you add this country or fine tune this, you'll get this effectiveness. Because here's the thing is, with speed and scalability, the answer is always in the data. If you ever want to go track down all the source of, the fentanyl trafficking, I always think about the opioid crisis, the pharmaceutical thing, the trail is always in the money. The trail is always there in the data. It's a matter of having the intelligence in the system and the processing power to go find it at scale. That's what Ingling and Fong figured out beautifully, because this fraud financial crime platform arena, I was a little burnt out from it. And then went into that digital identity space like everyone else. And, it was API calls. So you didn't have to kind of figure out this data manipulation, all this type of stuff. When I saw what they created, I understood it. I got it. And I'm like, this was my 5-year roadmap where I was 3 years ago, starting from the back end, which I'm sure I was never going to get capital for. And, and then I asked, what kind of customers do you serve? And they went through, Galileo, Marqeta. I'm like, that's really brand names. And then, NASA Federal Credit Union, Bill.com. So I'm like, wait, so this type of technology is not only available for the tops and the big processors, but we can help arm credit unions and community banks and folks who haven't had the investment or attention or the budgets for the large platforms that cost a lot of money to install, a lot of money to maintain, and a lot of subject matter expertise to keep up with. That's always been the trick. How do you get the best into the hands of everyone? Because if we're not fighting this battle together, it's, Jen Martin, way back in the day at SunTrust, I think she was the first one, and now it's used all the time, but whack-a-mole, everyone talked about they were doing whack-a-mole, throughout financial crimes, and they all talk to their colleagues because they're all really close. And these guys are just popping up at different institutions. Until we get a network effect of getting this technology, there's way too many holes. We're never going to plug them all, but we have to start making significant progress. And the ability to afford access to this type of technology is a huge draw for me. And that's really what I'm about at DataVisor.
I love it. I told you I was so excited to hear you go through the data side of that story, because you could have just changed out the names. That was our story, right? We looking at the, let's call it financial data space. It's sort of old, tired, right? Hasn't done a whole lot. And when we start looking at what additional data sets can we build on banks or on fintech or various markets, we applied the same approach you did, right? Let's take everything that we can publicly get, right? And additional sources. And then you start building out rules-based logic that'll take you so far, stacking your rules on top of each other, and then you can run things against that, right? And what ends up happening is I've heard of so many others that get, to a certain point and things fall apart, right? And I'll get this question from folks all the time, like, how in the world do you get that and get it so accurate? And it's like, it either works or it doesn't work, right? You either have a pile of bullshit that may be a pretty quality pile of bullshit, but it's still a pile of bullshit, right? Or you have effectively solved for X and it is math and this works, go forward. And you have to have that level to be able to build other things on top of that, right? And in what we both do, those building blocks are critical for the problem of tomorrow and the roadmap and the next thing that we're trying to solve. Once you get a critical mass of structured, normalized, clean, highly accurate data, and those building blocks in your own base that you've built, you've got IP that is building blocks that you can solve for anything. I mean, probably at least 80% of new things that we build for folks today, we don't even go out and look for a source. We just build it off of other things that we have. I have 72 variables, right, that could point me to the answer to that question. And it's not that we can solve and answer the question. It's that I can solve it 7 different ways and confirm it, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about, of using the data and mapping everything at a scientific level. It's really, really cool. And banks, credit unions, I mean, tons and tons of data that they have. And I think folks like us have always seen the opportunity there. And I think, you guys are taking that from the financial crime side largely, as well as regulatory. I think there's also a lot of opportunity and probably in the solution set that you have to turn that the other way, right? Whether that's monitoring against customer base, looking at behaviors, things that you could, turn into more positive opportunity zones, right? It's just such a cool space and so much bigger than I think everybody sees.
Okay, you guys ever seen the movie where you've got the bad guy and they just think all these crazy things and they do certain stuff to make the cameras turn on, or they can rob the bank and do all these that's really cool stuff. And you think, man, they're so damn smart. Why don't they actually do something good instead of rob a bank or whatever they're doing, right? Taking the jewels from the crown or whatever. And if you want to know what those kind of superstars look like when they're nerding out together doing good, that's the conversation I just listened to with you and Tanner both. It's like, it's really cool, man. It's like, y'all are smart enough to rob the crown jewels, but you're actually doing it for good, for the banking industry and to try to stop the bad guys. And I love that contrast of just kind of sitting here listening to both you guys go back and forth on this stuff. And it's like, we've got the good guys actually doing what they should be doing in these situations.
And we have to use technology for good. And it's not just, I mentioned the public-private partnership, but I also think vendors as well. Work with the things you're good at and partner with the other specialties out there. And then we start getting this network effect, start working as an organizational team. At the end of the day, we have to protect people. We have to protect innovation. It's not going behind. And again, it can't be another thing that, great, one day, now all the criminals are using stable coins to trade all their funds off the side, but we're going to check in 5 years to make sure we're doing everything kosher. It doesn't make any sense. People have to move faster. They have to understand. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind, and I don't want it to be hyperbole, that everyone's like, oh, there's just, potential for World War III and global war. I'm like, inside the financial system and inside the healthcare system and inside the data systems right now, there's so much money being lost and stolen and crimes being committed and solicited and paid for and funded. It's hard to comprehend. And
Right.
The battle in front of us is pretty big.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, of what we all picture from, a book, a movie, or past wars, of what some horrible global conflict looks like. And it's like, actually, it's called the internet, and it's happening every day. It's a hell of a war. There's, maybe more victims than any other war, right? It's kind of nasty to get too close to. And at the same time, it kind of inspires you to want to do something to be helpful. I got one more quick question for you. And I've just been the last month or so having this conversation a lot, especially since some of the more recent consent orders seem to have very well described sort of the BAS embedded sponsor bank scenario of, one of them, I think it was from Patriot, was sending folks on site to the program manager or FinTech, basically serving as an audit function, and a number of other things in there that were rock solid. for some reason, everybody's silent on these topics. To me, it just screams license to go play Bass embedded. FinTech is, a green light again. And I'm seeing, the rock stars are just running that direction. And I also see the transactions are screaming that direction. Do you see
Right.
the same thing? And why is nobody talking about this?
We do see the same thing. I mean, the growth in non-bank funding methods, again, I keep going back to 2018 for some reason. I don't know. I'm like, just never saw, I can't say I didn't see it coming,
Right.
but we were so used to kind of brushing off the demands of a consumer base because we had things all tied up. Well, not anymore. And I think really what the unfortunate thing is, and I believe this, and I think one of the folks that said it best to me was another name drop, Andrew Davies, head of global regulatory compliance over at Comply. He and I were together at FISERV, and we didn't leave one conversation without emphasizing the moral imperative of our roles.
Mm.
And until we get to the value base of the privilege we have in the financial space, how critical our services are, and the impact to individuals and companies and bottom lines, and there's such a trickle down effect. First, I think that the banks, the partner banking, the BaaS, it's really good, healthy. It's pushing good competition. It is pushing innovation. But again, like if they're not on an equal regulatory playing field, someone's going to get the misconception that they can go do things faster. And just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
Oh
And
my God.
the
Yeah.
one thing I just have to say is you have a really good business opportunity. Right now, fraud, financial crime, compliance, making sure we're not dealing with sanctioned party and terrorists, it's good business. There is a generation that is so much more informed than mine, than the prior was, that is going to understand if you are doing good, if your institution is standing for the right things, not because it's forced upon us, because it's their financial security in their future, and they're more aware than anyone of what happens when their information gets out there to them and their families, because now we're all experiencing it. So my advice is the regulations probably don't make a ton of sense on how they're applied to either side. The banks and the fintechs and the paytechs need each other. And that's where I see is a culminating universe where we're accelerating each other, we're sharing data. There is plenty of business to go around. And frankly, the businesses that want to work the right way with the right partners and, with the right intent, there's a big business in digitization and money movement and however you want to call it, in innovation. And if you just have that moral imperative that he told me about, that was an aspect of every deck and conversation, the future of digital commerce is great. And this is going to create jobs. It's going to create convenience, and it's going to create security. I mean, I see a world where I'm like, guys, why don't we use crypto, stablecoins, things like that as an automatic KYC, since we can see the ledger trail the whole way. Every activity is traced.
We're heading. Yep.
Like that's what we have to think about. We can't look at everything we don't understand as a risk. We have to educate ourselves on what the opportunity is. And I think the more collaboration between the banking ecosystem, the fintech ecosystem, everyone's going to have a bright future. And yeah, I mean, same on the vendor side. Like, don't try to be everything to everyone. Do the right thing, focus on the right things, bring in the right partners, bring your best of capabilities. Because I always say there is making money and doing the right thing.
Well said, man. I really that was outstanding. I appreciate that concept of not looking at everything as a risk, but educating to the opportunity, right? That doesn't mean jump in because we smell an opportunity. And I think you said a lot that kept ringing in my head as responsibility. And I mean, privilege is one that's really funny, right? Especially for somebody like me to look at it and be like, we are incredibly fortunate, right? And we're in also have a responsibility in the position that we all get to be in, and that is pretty cool. So appreciate that reminder today. I want to give you, man, take just a minute and any final thoughts you got.
No, I appreciate what you guys are doing. I mean, this is the type of thing we have to get out. Hope it's a little entertaining. I mean, we have to honestly be evangelical. And we have to put ourselves out there even when it's sometimes a little uncomfortable, but more collaboration, keep working together, keep supporting each other. And at the end of the day, do what's right, and financially, employment wise, you'll be fine.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks so much. This was a heck of a lot of fun, and I think great topics that everybody needs to talk about more. So you guys keep it up. We'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Get some back.
Thanks so much, Tanner and Dave. Take care. See you guys
See ya.
out there.